Hey everyone, are you interested in blood testing technology and diagnostics to chart your course through life and towards longevity? Well, great chat here with Mike, company CEO, and they specialize in photonic electronics and are trying to scale down blood testing incredibly smaller, incredibly cheaper with new devices. But anyway, great discussion. We also talk about kind of crazy diets and we talk about blood test connections through to health outcomes. So, really interesting chat. And if you wait till the end and in the description box below, there's a half price discount on their new technology. They're just starting out and emerging. So you might be interested in that too. A pal of mine in the network who was fantastic during the viral issue and also on low carb before that introduced me recently to a Mike Dabrowski. And it was very interesting because I'm obviously engineer, don't measure it, don't get fixed, big into blood tests, calcium scans, all the diagnostics. And this guy, Mike, we're going to be talking to now, is developing a new technology, ultra small, ultra low cost. And it could really, really be a game changer. But I'm going to ask him all about it. I know a limited amount now, and I'm going to ask him and let him explain. So great to see you, Mike.
Great meeting you.
Excellent. And you know what? You might just give a brief bio or something, just to let people know who you are and where you're coming from. And I think you got some pretty big investors already for this.
Yeah, sure. So, co-founder of SiPhox, the company that we're discussing today. My background's originally in biochemistry and materials, later on in photonics. I've done a couple of startups. The company is basically we started around some silicon photonic chip technology. So it's a little bit of an esoteric thing that I love, but a lot of people don't know about. So there are the chips in your phone, which use electrons essentially to do all the operations. And then there are chips that are mostly used in data centers that have emerged over the last 20 years, which work with photons. So like we're having this conversation, that's all electronic on our computers, but it has to go through fiber optic cables for to get from the US, where I am, to Ireland, right? And in order to do that, you have to convert the electrons into light. And so there have emerged this class of chips where light is actually controlled in the silicon structures. And they're all over the world, hyperscale, the whole internet runs on them. And what we've done is we took that technology and applied it to miniaturizing other optical systems. And one of the major areas where optics are used is actually blood diagnostics. So if you go to a large lab that's like Quest that's doing diagnostics, and you open one of the instruments, it's full of optics. So lasers, lenses, and so on. And it's now become possible to miniaturize those components onto chips. So that's what we're doing at SiPhox.
Right, excellent summary. And I always loved the total internal reflection concept of the light cables. It was just groundbreaking way back. But Theranos is what might occur to some people, kind of occurred to me. So maybe a little word around that debacle and then the contrast.
Yeah, we were just at a I'll just start with it. We were just at a conference. It's called HLTH, and we had a big booth doing. We were collecting people's blood, and for with this, we'll talk about, I'm sure, with the quantified panel that we run, and that's the question you get from everybody, and there's a couple things. So firstly, Theranos didn't really have any technology, so it was more one of these companies. I think actually these companies exist in every deep tech industry, but in health, it's just the stakes are higher, so people have heard of it. But what happens is when there's a hard problem that's unsolved, if you just say you've solved it completely with no compromises. So Theranos said, we'll do it with one drop and we'll do all the blood tests you need, which
Hmm.
consists of three types of blood tests. It's CBC, a complete blood count, which actually requires a microscope that looks at the cells in your blood. There's chemistry, which is usually an electrochemical test, like for ions and so on. And then there's immunoassays, which looks at proteins and hormones. Completely different tests. If you go into a lab, they're run on different massive machines that work totally different. And so promising to do all of that, like essentially even solving one of those problems, that's what we're doing. We're solving immunoassays. Even solving one of those problems only became possible the last decade, in a small form factor. So there's a company that fills this niche in most spaces. Like there was a LiDAR company that raised a lot of money, that was promising, we have the smallest LiDAR, that, it has all the features, right? Back when there was a big hype around LiDAR a couple of years ago when everybody was sure there'd be self-driving cars today and they would all use lidar. And yeah, that company raised maybe $1 billion, and they were just showing an empty box at conferences. So it's that's a niche. You can occupy it for about 5 years successfully, where you raise money as long as you promise exactly what people want. That that works pretty well. I do think. I
Mm.
mean, one thing is that I guess people know this story well, but Theranos wasn't able to raise money from real VCs, especially ones that understood. Even I think software VCs, but ones that understood medical or like devices, chips, and so on, never invested in Theranos, even though they pitched everybody. So they ended up
Mhm.
getting investments from kind of like rich individuals, senators, and so on. So we're backed by Khosla Ventures, which has a lot of investments in diagnostics. So they have lots of mature companies that have FDA clearance. And then a couple of, I mean, YC and others. And actually, there's a company that uses very similar technology to ours in the sensor. So we have this is our cartridge. There's a small sensor in the cartridge that's square. So that's a silicon photonic chip. It has actually a bunch of waveguides on it, and that's where the proteins go, and you do the measurement. And so that type of sensor is already FDA cleared, but it goes inside a very large instrument. And so what we did is we miniaturized that. Instrument's more complex. So back when that company started, it wasn't possible to miniaturize it. So we actually miniaturized that instrument. But this type of blood test is already on the market.
Right, very good. And just for people listening, VCs you mentioned there is venture capitalists, so where the money actually comes from. And ELISA, you're mimicking the ELISA type system essentially?
Yeah, so immunoassays, this is a great question. So it depends. You tell me how technically you want me to go, but basically, when you have a small molecule like glucose, so if you have a continuous glucose monitor, for example, what happens in the continuous glucose monitor is you have an enzyme that recognizes glucose and it consumes it. So it's actually taking the glucose, breaking it up, and as it breaks it up, it generates an electrical current, and that's what's being measured. So that works for small molecules because small molecules are different. So glucose and lactate are different. Proteins and hormones are made up of building blocks that are all the same. They're made up of amino acids. The difference is the structure. So in order to sense the difference between proteins, you have to touch them. So the way it works is you get an antibody. Now, after COVID, everybody knows what an antibody is. So basically, you get an antibody that sticks to the protein of interest. So for example, insulin. You'll get an antibody that has a binding site that specifically binds to insulin structurally. That's the important thing. And you have to have a way of sensing that protein's presence. And so normally this is like, I mean, there are different ways to do it, but the standard assay takes like 4 hours and you only get a readout at the end. That's ELISA. So 2 to 4 hours readout at the end. The way we do it is because we have the photonics, we can actually sense directly. So we make a measurement once per second. So we actually get a direct measurement as things are attaching. So we have an antibody on our sensor, and as proteins are attaching to it, we can actually sense their presence. So the sensor doesn't know what it's measuring, but because we know the antibody that we put on there, we know we're expecting insulin, right? So if we see something binding, the amount of that is going to give you the insulin level. That's how it works.
Excellent. And you know what? It just occurs to me there in terms of control. You, of course, can characterize it and you can see the action happening electronically or as you monitor. And you can characterize and decide, okay, at this point, we can now take a pretty good reading. So you've probably got a safety margin, but you know when you're getting your answer dependably, I guess.
Yeah, so this is definitely another time we should do it. If we do this in person, I'll test you on our device and you can actually see how it works. But we take 4 minutes of data and we cut out like the last minute. So we kind of wait for it to, there's some equilibration that happens at the beginning. So we use basically the last minute of data, and that's where we get our information. So you have the right idea basically.
Ah, yeah.
So in ELISA, what they do is they'll let the reaction happen for a long time, and then they look at the endpoint. They kind of try to measure how much is there at the end. And that requires additional chemistry because they can't see the protein itself. They have to label it and so on. In our case, we're actually watching the rate of binding. So we use the slope, and that allows you to do, it's more accurate and it's also faster. You don't have to wait till the whole thing is complete.
Right. So, well, there, accuracy very important. So, in terms of um, comparing it to a laboratory ELISA or whatever, are those correlations, I guess, are already done pretty extensively? You're happy with your R and R reproducibility and repeatability kind of thing?
So we haven't launched the, so this is the at-home device, right? I just showed it. It'll get
Mm.
smaller and a little bit, the form factor will get a little bit nicer before we launch. It's like 80% empty space right now. So these are
Mm.
the engineering units. So we're doing lots of demos of these. Like we did a bunch of demos of this at the health conference and so on. We validated it so far for inflammation testing against in a triple blinded third party study against the Roche Cobas. So the Roche Cobas is your gold standard large instrument that's used by Quest or whatever. I mean, there are a couple of them, but it's one of the three that are common. So we've done that for inflammation testing. We have a whole, so that's HSCRP. We have a whole
Mm.
roadmap of assays we're adding to this before it launches. So we'll be doing these validations for all of them. But the results are already pretty much what you would, there are some small things, but generally it's close to what you would submit to the FDA. The difference is that we haven't done design control yet. So it's a requirement. It's a good requirement. The FDA actually for
Mm.
diagnostics is very reasonable. So the requirement is that you have to document every design decision uh, of the whole product before submitting it. So that takes like, we'll do this small like rev for a user experience, and then we'll release it as part of a study next year. So people can sign up. They have to consent to be part of a study, but they can sign up and use it at home. And after that, we'll be submitting it to the FDA under having done the design control and the study.
Right, very good. So it's a work in progress, but the HSCRP is essentially validated now. Is there early data for the other ones, or are you kind of projecting that they should all be possible with a tight kind of regulation, or you've done early data to verify some of those informally, non-officially?
So we've definitely verified a lot of them informally. We're adding, so this is a multiplex device. So we're actually, it goes up to 15 plex. So we're working on adding ApoA and ApoB, so like HDL and LDL cholesterol to
Mm.
HSCRP. And then we'll be working to add insulin. So we're hoping that the first panel will be, this isn't fixed yet, but we're hoping that it'll be HSCRP, ApoA, ApoB, insulin. So you can get that whole panel in one shot. So that's what we're working on now.
All right. And you can get the ApoB over ApoA1 ratio, but if you've got a good insulin, you don't need it so much. But they're an interesting few measurements. So the other thing is currently you've got something on offer as such, and I might refer to the offer in the outro, but you've got something on offer right now, but it's not this device, I think. It's an existing offer of multiple tests in a kind of blood spot fashion.
Mhm. Yeah, so we took a little bit unorthodox approach for a medical device company because our goal is to have a device in every home. So typically when you build a diagnostic, you're kind of aiming at, okay, we're going to put this in 1,000 doctors' offices or hospitals. Because we're a chip company, what chips do is they take something that already exists and they make it very small and very cheap. That's generally the trend. So you also enable certain things, but the big deal is that the cost drops hundredfold, the size drops hundredfold. So that means the putting it in the home is really like that's the use case. In our case, it can be used in the doctor's office and everything, but that's not the ambitious version of the company. And because of that, we really wanted to connect with people early on, like actual users, and essentially build a roadmap where the markers that we're testing and the way that the device is used is actually going to make people healthier. So not just, I mean, we've gotten a ton of feedback from doctors and people in public health and so on, but we just want to interact directly with actual people trying to make themselves healthier and manage their health. And so we launched this at-home test, which is it's your typical form factor, which is you take a couple drops of blood, you put it on a. So one thing we did differently is some companies use tubes of blood. We're using a blood spot card that has a serum separation. So this is been around for a little while, but it's relatively new. We worked with a specialty lab that processes these. I don't know if you have you ever used one of these?
Not exactly, though. I'm familiar with Meridian Valley Labs on the West Coast up in Seattle. They do a 5 hour insulin test with like 5 or 6 blood spots. I guess it's similar.
So it is similar. I know what you're talking about. That's the craft curve that Meridian does. So we're actually considering offering that as a follow-up to the test we do here because it's
Hmm.
it's very valuable data, right? But basically, I mean, the craft curve is incredible. But the way this works, there's a difference. So the main difference is that when you put your blood over here, it actually runs across the card, and that separates the red blood cells and white blood cells from the serum. So when the lab gets this dried, they cut out the part that has the serum or plasma, and it's much more reliable for certain analytes, and it lasts longer. So this enables it to be shipped by USPS, which in America cuts the cost and also makes it very convenient because they'll actually pick it up at your house. So you just put it on your mailbox and they'll pick it up. And so that it just smooths the whole process out significantly. The other thing we did is we worked with the lab that specializes in these to increase the number of analytes. So we maxed out how many analytes they can do in one card. And that's important because what companies usually do, so if you look at like an Everlywell type company, there are many of them that do these at-home tests. Their strategy is, okay, we'll sell you a prediabetes test, or we'll sell you an inflammation test or a metabolic health test. They won't, but they're not trying to max the number of analytes. They're actually trying to say like, oh, you want to test these 4 things, buy 4 boxes, right? And so that means 4 blood draws. That means whatever, right? So we said, we don't care. We're not trying to make a profit on this. We just want to grow it as big as possible to get a large number of people testing and get some feedback, like which markers are interesting, which ones are actually benefiting people, how can we help them, get healthier. And so we said, let's cut the cost as low as possible. Like when we sell this, the monthly subscription, we actually don't even make a profit. We just sell it at cost. So let's cut the cost as low as possible, increase the number of markers as much as possible so that we can track as much as we can. And then the user actually can figure out, like, not just, oh, I tested myself for prediabetes, but I have this complete health panel, or relatively complete, and I can see how because let's say you make an intervention for prediabetes. So you go completely, carnivore. I don't know, like I tried the carnivore diet for 2 weeks. Very fun. So you go carnivore, right? But then what is that going to do to your cardiac markers? What is that going to do to, your testosterone and so on? So basically just being able to look at a broader picture is not only valuable because in general it's valuable, but it's also, if you're making an intervention for one thing, you really want to be looking at as much as possible to make sure that you're balancing your lifestyle. And we actually are really happy with this. So we ran a study over the summer where we had everybody in the company and about 30 more people doing tests weekly. So it's a pretty aggressive testing schedule. And we found that a lot of these markers change weekly across, like inflammation, metabolic health. We do like a couple nutritional markers, as well as like hormonal, testosterone, DHEA, that type of thing, and then cardiovascular. And we found that a lot of them change even on a weekly basis and are labile. So you can change your lifestyle, diet, supplements, and you'll see changes in them pretty quickly. And that's exciting because for us, like, we are trying to make it as easy and as cheap as possible to test this stuff. So we don't do weekly right now for customers, just because the cost's a little bit too high. So we do monthly. That's kind of where we landed. And that's also kind of, for the amount of blood you have to draw and everything else, monthly is pretty good. Like, it's not a burden. Weekly we got very good at doing finger pricks. Like, I'm like a master finger prick master now. I can do it at parties as a joke, but anyway, so that's kind of how we ended up here. And so we're scaling this up, still working on cutting the cost even further. And then next year, what'll happen is these tests will go, once you have the device, these tests will go to quarterly. So you get the broader panel quarterly, and then you get cartridges that are focused on the markers that you care about on a bi-weekly. So you get 2 of them per month. So that way you can optimize that one panel. So a couple of markers. That's the plan.
Right. Okay, very good. So, and I think there's 17 in this initial offering that gets you in monthly. To be honest, monthly is plenty, I would say. Interestingly, I know insulin can collapse within days of switching to a healthy diet, but a lot of other things have more kind of hysteresis and more lag. So, I mean, monthly is very fair, I would guess myself. And 17 or so tests, monthly cadence at the moment. That's the one we'll talk about people trying out. And that one's pretty established technology relatively, but you're putting a lot more into one package to make it more efficient and more valuable, roughly, this system. And then the next stage, but is that next year for the actual device with the cartridges, multiple measurements, but obviously like a glucose meter or a super glucose meter with many tests?
Yeah, exactly. And the idea is that you still take the broad screen, so the 17 markers, you still take that once a quarter, and it's kind of like upkeep, and then you can focus. So let's say if you have high inflammation, we'll give you the cardiometabolic cartridge that's got CRP, the ApoB insulin, for example. And so you can focus on that and take a test every 2 weeks to see how your diet, lifestyle, whatever it is actually changing that. That's the idea. We
Gotcha. And
also we also actually I see you're wearing a I don't know what that device is. Is that the cardio check or something?
that's actually a Whoop device, and it's it is incredible. I'm actually going to do a video.
You got the charger on it.
Oh, I have the charger on it. Yeah, I put it on earlier and I forgot about it. But it's just incredible data. And you know what I use it for primarily? It's like my kind of my good angel. So when I drink a bit too much, I stay up late, I overdo things, don't do enough exercise. This tells me the next morning and makes me go, oh my God. I mean, it literally goes red overnight. And the next morning, it tells you. And then if you do all the good stuff, it's green, your heart rate variability is up, your sleep is excellent. Good God. So I use it as a kind of a nanny. I'm not sure everyone's meant to use it that way, but I just find it a great feedback.
Yeah, 100%. So we over the last couple of years, we were testing basically every device out there. So we tested a lot of these wearables, as well as the continuous glucose monitors and so on. And I landed on the Aura Ring. It's mainly for form factor. Because it's in certain situations like just like a wristband is inconvenience, but Aura I would say and Whoop are they're very similar. But there might be some advantage. I don't know. I haven't looked very deeply at which one has the best data, but they both give the same type of data generally.
Well, to be honest, Mike, I'm Ivor, show me the data, Cummins, and I always need to see the data in any issue. I'll decide. However, in this case, I have a friend who's so brilliant. He's a cardiologist in Houston, Texas, Dr. Nadir Ali, and he got big into sleep and heart rate research. So he was able to tell me top of the heap are the Ring and the Whoop. And I think the latest Ring may be edging ahead, the latest model. So the only concern some people have, last time I enthused about this, was there's a lot of people worried about their data. And yes, this is monthly and it flows your data up to their cloud. I don't personally care about that data so much because I know now there's devices that can get your heart rate and everything from 10 feet away. So at the end of the day, point it at your chest.
Huh. Yeah, the reason I brought it up is I'm like in the camp of at this point I'm just giving up all my data. I feel like it's like a avalanche, they're just getting it. But anyway, I mean in some case,
Well,
hopefully to a degree you can protect it. I mean you can use a different name when you sign up to these services. That's like one approach. But what I was going to say is, we realized that it's really valuable to look at your blood data next to your heart rate, sleep data. And so we created a whole dashboard where we display our blood test results next to an average of your results from your Whoop or your Aura Ring or whatever it is. So we take the last month before you took the blood test and we tell you, look, here's your average sleep, here's your inflammation, right? This is the direction it's going. And we see a ton of correlations in our own data, like looking at the metadata of our customers. And so like we have the whole anonymized data set and we just occasionally, every month we run just like a simple correlation heat map. And so for like inflammation is 50% correlated with sleep. So that means for half of people, if they sleep less, they get more inflammation, essentially. So it's interesting because it means that it's not true for everybody, which is, so if you tell somebody like you should sleep more and your inflammation will go down, that has a 50% chance of being correct. So you actually have to measure, to see because it could have totally different causes. So it's fascinating, but that's how we set it up. So you connect your wearable and then you get the blood data in parallel.
that's perfect. I mean, integration of data and the synergy between that, and it's individualized, absolutely. And my go-to example, a simple example for lay people, they did a study, I think it was US Marines, but I'm not entirely sure. And they deprived them of sleep down to around 4.5 hours versus 6 or 7 that they usually got. And after I think it was only one calendar month with the single intervention, their insulin resistance had doubled, their sensitivity had halved. And it's just illustrative. Like if you give up smoking, within a couple of weeks, your insulin tumbles. So all these things, stress, sleep, and your psychology, they all interact with the food you put in your mouth, and it's all one big system. And it's different for each person. Some people can do without sleep very well, and you won't measure much inflammation. Some people, however, it's a really important thing for their physiology. So if you want to understand yourself and your longevity and strive for longevity, you got to be looking at the whole tapestry, really. So yeah, so there's the 17 tests, but they, as time goes on and the new device comes in, of course, there's still a place for those laboratory based tests, as you said, a 3 month cadence, verifying the suite. But then the device will allow you to tailor. So, depending on what you really want to target, because you've built some data already, you're saying, okay, I'm really good on X, Y, Z, W. A, B, C, D cluster is where I'm questionable or I want to focus. And those would be used with the electronic device, the photonic device.
Exactly. Yes.
With a 2 week cadence, I think you said, or at least that's offered. I guess some people can choose to go monthly if they feel they don't need it so often.
The cost is lower because the cartridges, so the device itself, right now we manufacture it for $300 and we'll get it down to $100 or less.
Mm.
We're working with one of the biggest chip fabs in the world to get the cost down even further. They're excited about it because it's a new consumer product for chips, right? So it's a whole new category. So there are the smart speakers, there are the cell phone, it's a completely new category having a diagnostic in your home. But So we'll get the cost down for the hardware below $100. We actually give that away for free. It's just like a part of the subscription. And then the cartridges will initially, our cost is going to be $20, and then we're going to try to cut it all the way to 5 as we scale up. That's a matter of volume. So
Mm.
we haven't decided yet what the exact cartridge cost will be for the user, but it'll be close to our cost. So it's going to be much cheaper than taking, your typical. If you go into Quest in America, this is specific to America. There are some places where it's much cheaper. Lee is always laughing about how much cheaper it is in Slovenia to do a blood test. But if you walk into Quest in America and you ask for CRP test, it's about $65, and that means you have to schedule an appointment, get a venous blood draw, sit there,
Yeah.
potentially, get sick from the other people in the room and everything else. And then finally you get it like a day or two later, you get your result for $65. So it's yeah, and that's a one-plex test, right? So you just get CRP from that. So there's a lot of room to improve, basically. And then in a typical at-home test, if you go on any website to do one of these like Fox tests, it's also in the same range because the cost of shipping everything and the failures that go into that and so on, it just there's a floor to how cheap you can make that type of test.
Yeah, and that is true. Actually, people don't often kind of put in the time cost of money of going to labs and visiting places. But at the end of the day, the reason I change oil and filter on my cars, it's not really to save money. It's to save me having to bring the car down, leave it there, collect it again. That's what hurts me. So I just do it myself. And the cartridges then that you mentioned, just to be clear, you referred to costs. Is each cartridge a specific assay? So if you get a cluster for say cardio, and are there 4 or 5 cartridges for the cardio?
It's one cartridge. It's one cartridge.
Ah,
So our
one
goal is
blood draw.
to get the entire panel that currently we do on this card. Our goal is to get all of that into one cartridge. But more realistically, it'll be like 3 cartridges at first. So
Okay,
that's
three.
that's our goal. But you don't have to. The
So
thing is, you don't have to take all 3, right? So you pick the one that actually is important to your biology, right? That's the thing. Just
that
because you get the screen once a quarter and you can see kind of what's the situation.
Yeah, well, it's empowering. It puts the power back in the hand of the individual, author of their own destiny, which I love because I've always been like that. And yeah, so okay. And the card at the moment, by the way, the existing offering, which is the card going back to a lab. How many is you do 17 in total, but that's not on one card, right? That's a few cards.
It's one card.
Oh,
I think there are 3 ratios, so it's actually 14 targets, and then we add 3 ratios, and so you get to 17. That's the total. So, but that's all one card.
one card. And how many blood drops? Not that it matters because once you warm the finger up and you get the blood going and you keep it going, I find you can just keep the blood running. If you stop for a,
I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. It sounds like you've done this a million times, but the way I do it is so this is how it works. I'll walk through it. So this is, you get one of these kits, you open it up, and it contains the card, and then a couple of finger prick devices. So like you said, if you warm your fingers up, you can get a lot more blood flow and it's easier. We have two sizes of finger pricks. This is something other companies don't do because they're not aimed at like a monitoring test. They're just doing a single test. So what they do, this is the device that's typically given with these tests. It's this blue one. So this works amazing if you have thick skin. If you have thick skin, you just use this. It doesn't hurt much. It's great. If you're a woman, for example, or if you just have thin skin, this can leave a bruise. It's actually a pretty big lancet. So that's what we found when we did testing. So we actually added a second one that's smaller. And this one, actually, I'm able to get this one to work for me. The trick that I do is I actually will go do a compound exercise, just like 2 sets of deadlifts or something. And then you get so much blood flow to your fingers that even this will work. It's like a, you know, it's so you can really modulate this. But we provide these 2 sizes because for some people, if you're doing a monthly test, I mean, you want to optimize this, right? You don't want to be like leaving, you know, bigger marks than you need to. But generally, these things don't really hurt, especially again if you tune the size and if you prepare. It's very easy to get the blood. So what you do is you get this card, prick your finger after warming up. So it's either doing some exercise, putting your hand under warm water, whatever it is. We highly recommend taking the test 1 hour after you wake up, and the reason is, and fasted. So you can have water, but nothing else. And the reason is a couple of the markers need to be fasted, like insulin. But the other reason is that you should check your circadian rhythm. So we test cortisol, testosterone, a few other things that are affected by circadian rhythm. And so what happens is, if you look at the graph of cortisol, about an hour after you wake up, it's supposed to peak. So you just want to be testing at the same time every test. So you can see, like, what does my cortisol peak look like? Because it's actually supposed to be relatively high. If you have low cortisol in the morning, you can feel very tired. So you want to make sure, like, okay, I'm actually getting my cortisol bump. Because otherwise, you know, you can kind of be compensated with coffee and everything else. But if you tune that, you're actually very energized in the morning. So that's, and the other option is you can take it all the way at night and see if your cortisol is high at night, and that's why you can't sleep. So there's kind of, I mean, depending on what's happening to you, you can play with that. But we generally recommend doing it in the morning. And testosterone also is a morning measurement, actually. So because it varies a little bit, it also varies a little bit with the circadian rhythm. So that's why that's our recommendation. Of course, you can take the test anytime.
Yeah. And, you know, consistency is the key. And if you choose to go with the morning, learn from that. And of course, it's important that people understand the basic science in this and not go blind. But then you could switch to evenings by decision to look at that, understanding it, and look at evenings for a while, get a consistent kind of value of what your evening is. And there's a lot of scope for a lot of exploration, personal exploration for sure. And you've played around with diets. You mentioned carnivore, and kind of what are the ones that appeared to you most successful?
So I actually think that, you know, for me, going on any diet somehow makes me lose weight. I think because, you know, maybe my normal diet's just bad, but it's the 2 that I found the most fun were, this is not a health recommendation. This is purely like personal enjoyment. The 2 that I found the most fun were carnivore and potato. I think these are diametrically opposite diets. So the potato diet is essentially a vegan diet where you eat nothing but potatoes. You can have a little bit of olive oil or something. And you have to supplement, I think it's vitamin A and vitamin K, because they're not in potatoes. But potatoes, everything else, I mean, you're Irish, so this hopefully hits home. Literally every other thing is in potatoes, supposedly. I felt surprisingly good on the potato diet. Very surprising. I don't know what's in potatoes. It seems like there's some kind of poison in them that makes you not hungry anymore. I'm not really sure what it is. People don't know. Like I've tried to read about it. It's not well understood. But for some reason, it's like super satisfying to eat potatoes, for me at least. And a lot of people report this. I don't know if it's good for you. I just tried this for 2 weeks. I felt pretty good. And then I said, okay, this might be dangerous. I'm going to stop. but that one is very fun. It actually, I was measuring my biomarkers. So that's the interesting thing. And they were, I would say, mostly stable. So they didn't get much better, but they didn't get worse. Even like my HbA1c, which you would think eating nothing but carbs would actually increase your HbA1c, but it did not. I don't know why, but you have to eat them with the skins, so you get some fiber. That's one thing. But there's some details. But anyway, so that's a very interesting one. I don't know if I recommend it. I'm just telling you what I did. And then I
Mhm.
right after that tried carnivore. Carnivore is a crazier one. I know. Have you ever tried carnivore?
I'm close to carnivore in a general sense, but not hardcore. I eat one meal a day and I'm very focused on meat for nutrient density. Meats, fish, eggs, and some vegetables. That's what I target.
I see. So you're already almost correct. Carnivore is very fun. I think it's probably even more fun than potato. Again, I don't know if it's really healthy. I'm not an expert in this at all. My markers, I'll tell you what empirically what happened to my markers. So first of all, I was very energetic. So I don't know what's in meat, but it definitely makes you. It's like you get a lot of energy from eating it for sure. Um, I'm trying to think. I could actually pull up the data, but all of my markers improved except
Yeah.
for, and I think this is a well-known thing, except for LDL. And I think triglycerides also. So this is a well-known debate that I don't have a horse in, but that's what happened.
Yeah.
I think my ApoB also went up a little bit, but not as much as my LDL.
Yeah.
That's the experience.
Well, the LDL and even ApoB actually, on its own as a measure, it has almost no meaning, but it's important to look at in the context of all the measurements. So it's not too surprising that everything looked good because we evolved from scavenging and, organ meats and meats and then became the most successful hunters on the planet. Interestingly, I was just had a debate with a vegan this morning on British GB News. I'll send you it afterwards. You can enjoy. Dr. Michael Greger, a vegan doctor. And I didn't get to mention, but I had a sheet from Dr. Mike Leeds. He's big into paleoanthropology. And there was an ancestor around 2.5 million years ago that actually branched off from what became Homo sapiens and became just vegetable eating. A hominid, but vegetable eating. Got a bigger jaw, heavy skull from the big muscles to grind all the vegetation. And it basically went into an evolutionary dead end. So, so I think
That's the
it all,
ultimate. That's like the ultimate dunk on the vegetarians. That's
well,
very funny.
I didn't bring it up because I knew I'd have to qualify it, and I can qualify it here very briefly. The thing is that we evolved primarily from meat, and we traded off, digestive size like an ape for brain size, massive brain energy needed, because we were successful hunters. But we can also tolerate long periods of not having access to game. So you can actually live as a vegetarian. You got to watch the supplements, vegan even more so. Our bodies can do that now, but it's still important to note how we got here, what the optimum was that created Homo sapiens. But you can certainly, I have many vegetarian friends and even some good friends who are vegan, but they're very careful with supplements, B12 and many other things. They're smart vegans and they know. So that's it. So carnivore, yeah. Well, I think a pseudo carnivore is what I do, but I get vegetables because vegetables often have minerals that are not so present in meat. So I'm kind of omnivore. And potatoes, I love you said that. Yeah, I have potatoes and I leave the skin on. I even almost leave them a little bit dirty, a bit of dirt, because there's potassium potatoes and other useful minerals, and I think the skin concentrates. And final thing, I won't say any more, Mike, because I know you got to run shortly, but potatoes and this potato diet was a big deal around 5 years ago. Huge debates in the keto low carb community, and there was a whole phenomenon of carbosis. The new term was made, carbosis. Ketosis, ultra low carb. There's a carbosis phenomenon that if humans eat almost all carbohydrate, they go over the hump into an area that can lead to insulin sensitivity. And they called it carbosis. Peter of Hyperlipid is a bit of a genius, went through all of the protons and the electron transport chain and why it happened. I didn't go too deep, but there is an interesting space there in the extreme high carb. But I'd rather stick with an omnivore healthy diet.
Interesting. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Google carbosis and you'll find a whole ton of debates. Um, excuse me. So very good. So I think we've gone through it now. Just in terms of the company, you've got your capital, you've got your venture capitalists. You're largely okay there. So your path forward, your strategy, your plans, which are on the website, I can put the link in. You're pretty much all go from here on in. I understand.
Yeah, it's a pretty good time to be a small company actually. So like a lot of large companies are struggling because they grew really fast during the boom times. So if you're a
Mm.
small company, so we're 20 people, if you're a small company and you're funded, it's a pretty good time to be around because a lot of very good people are looking for work and it's just less crazy than it was a couple of years ago or even 1 year ago. So I enjoy the downturns. It's kind of makes people think more carefully about the products they're launching and so on. So there's less fluffy, I think, and more like yeah, we take like more lean approaches are used. So I think from a perspective of working at running a startup, so me and my co-founder, I think are enjoying we're enjoying actually the climate. It's definitely not as it's not like the go-go days of fundraising. So fundraising is harder, but everything else is easier. So it's I think from that perspective, it's actually kind of nice that this I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's kind
Yeah.
of in our minds because we're in the startup world. That's the big news is that 1 year ago you could raise money with a crazy idea, and today even businesses that are doing well are struggling. That like companies that 50-person type startups, even if they're doing well, it's still like a big struggle to raise money because VCs kind of had they're just having a hangover from funding a lot of 15-minute grocery delivery companies. you know, I don't know. I think the
Yeah.
amount of money, there's a graph of like the amount of money that went into 15-minute grocery delivery versus like fusion or something like nuclear power. It's like very funny. It's like whatever, 100 million went into nuclear power and like 2 billion went into 15-minute grocery delivery. So hopefully we'll get like a little reversal of that. But
We're we're back to a more, I guess, a more rational and reasonable investment environment. And I guess now you kind of have to have your bleep together before people are willing to invest. Whereas, what did your man say in the financial crash? Irrational exuberance. Wasn't that Greenspan way back? Bit of that. So great stuff, Mike. We'll probably roll it to a close there because people, yeah, we chatted before the pod and about long pods. People, if it's Joe Rogan, that's fine, but I'm not Joe Rogan, unfortunately.
yeah, this was great. It's very interesting talking to you.
Any other, yeah, last thoughts?
I don't know if we need to add this to the podcast, but I'm just curious, what's your experience with blood testing been? Like, I think I talked a lot, but I'm curious because I know you've done it. You've probably done more blood tests than I have by a factor of 10 or something, if not 100. I don't know. At least Lee has. Lee's doing blood tests all day. He's like, he does it as part of his, he's like, goes to the store, gets a coffee, does a blood test. I guess it's Slovenia. It's like super accessible. But yeah, I'm curious. What's your experience been with it? And
Yeah,
what
so
did you feel was missing or anything like that?
in general, over the last few years, yeah. Well, I am big into if you don't measure it, it don't get fixed. If it don't measure it, you can't understand it. I mean, that's my rule. That said, because I've done 10 years of research, thousands of papers analysed, etc., and not to be arrogant here, but I don't feel I need too regular a blood test. I kind of know what I'm doing wrong and right, and I every year or two get a kind of a full panel. But I'm not like I don't use the CGM. I occasionally prick my for glucose, but I'm not driven to constantly test. But then again, I'm comfortable. I know the full spectrum of what's
You're
going
at the
on.
plateau. You've made it to the kind of like the plateau of understanding.
Yeah, so occasionally I'll check, to see am I missing something, but invariably I'm not. To give an example, I got some tests 6 months ago with a good friend of mine in Ireland, Dr. Farrell, and I got a kind of a full spectrum. And I told him the liver enzymes are not going to be great, Alan, but the rest will be fine. And he said, no, 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 it might be all fine. And I said, Alan, the liver enzymes are not going to be great. Oh, okay. And it came back. I was precisely right. So I knew even before I got the test. And that was because of lockdown and high stress year or two. I was involved in a lot of quite intense activity. And I knew I was going a little heavy on the indulgence in the evening with the wine. I kind of knew that. So that's an example. But now that's all fixed now. Uh, so I think I got a full full test with Dr. Steve Horvitz in New Jersey, a good pal of mine. When I was in New York, I drove down to New Jersey, and he basically took out all the laboratories, kind of big manuals, and he said, Ivor, what do you want? And he brought in a phlebotomist on the Saturday for me. Great guy. But I went through it. It was a shopping list. I got everything. I mean, I got the omega-3 index. I got all the advanced lipoproteins. I just got everything. And the interesting one I'm going to ask you, leptin and adiponectin are very powerful measurements and rarely done. So maybe you'd be able to do that in the long term, would you? Or
Sure, it was actually on our roadmap. So we kind of pivoted. So we started out with kind of more interesting longevity markers like C-peptide, cystatin C, leptin adiponectin was one of them, like this ratio. We decided that because just from talking to people, we realized that people aren't even measuring their CRP, and it's like that's so well understood, so easy to lower. I mean, for most people, it's very easy. I mean, just start by taking the standard supplement that's recommended if it's high, right? That we realized that like you don't want to launch necessarily with something advanced because there's so much low-hanging fruit, but that's those types of panels for longevity and just for people that really either understand or are looking to understand kind of newer, more cutting edge, diagnostics approaches. That's definitely in the pipeline. So we just realized that we should start with the basics. And we're looking also to partner with kind of like the champions of these things. So for example, like a researcher that's a champion of leptin adiponectin in a way, right? Because it's also an education effort. So with CRP, at least, it's kind of well understood broadly. I was going to ask you one thing. Okay, are you willing to do a blood test, do potato diet, and then do another blood test, or like
oh
some opposite diet? I think I don't know. Maybe
yeah.
this is like hurting yourself for science potentially, right? But I think I mean I had a lot of fun with it. But anyway, you don't have to answer now. But but if you are,
Okay.
we'll send you two kits. If you want to try something crazy, we'll send you two kits. You can do one before, one after. I think that's a fun. It's like always a fun experiment.
Yeah, no, and you know what I would, and I wouldn't in no way be worried about any implications of it, because a couple of weeks you can literally do anything. You can eat nothing for okay, you don't want to drink Coca-Cola for 2 weeks, but a potato diet, sure. I'm just thinking the way my life is, am I really going to invest in that? But you know what? I'll take it under advisement, and think about it. Super. So, any last questions? No, I think that's the only other clarification. You're going out first with the device, later with CRP, HSCRP only, and then it'll expand up these modules to have all these other tests.
We might even, depending, by the time we launch the study, so we're going to launch the study in Q3 of next year. And one exciting thing is we're only available in America and Canada right now, but we'll expand. This is important, but first of all, we're going to try to expand the mail-in test to Europe. That's something that we're working on. And the other thing is the device can be used anywhere. So you can participate in the study with the device from South Africa if you want to, right? So it's because it's local, right? You just use it in
Yeah.
your house. So that's kind of one exciting thing. If people are interested in joining the study, but they're outside the US, so they can't actually buy anything from us now, they can't use our kits, you can just throw your email into, there's an email, like sign up to our like newsletter type thing at the bottom of the site. And throw your email in there, and we're going to send out an email blast at some point next year for people interested in joining the study. It'll be prioritized to people that are already using our service, but there should be some space, especially for people that are outside the country. And what was I had another thing. Yeah, okay. So CRP, one reason we chose CRP is because it's so predictive of lifespan. So you can actually check out, we have a cool article on on our blog that we wrote with, do you know Michael Lustgarten by any chance?
I
Uh,
know the name I'm trying to place, but I certainly know the name.
he has a YouTube channel where he's like super detailed. He does a ton of quantified self stuff. He's based here. So I'm in Seattle right now, but he's based in Boston, where SiPhox is and where I normally am. And he's at Tufts. So he does a ton of quantified self stuff, and he has a very long, awesome video on CRP and how it relates to lifespan. So we have a little bit of that information in the article that we wrote. We co-authored it with him. But that's one of the reasons we chose CRP is because if you're a life insurance company and you want to price somebody's insurance, you can probably do it pretty well. I mean, it's also true with insulin resistance, right? But like CRP is one where you can basically, if you know their CRP level, you can more or less price their life insurance. And so we think it's just a very high value. It's a single marker. It's just super high value because you can change it, and it's also very predictive of lifespan. So that's one of the reasons we went with it as the first one.
Very good. And the only other thing I'd say there is occasionally people get on to me, even in Ireland locally. If you have a subclinical infection, your CRP can shoot up. And I always say, look, go back in a couple of weeks. So don't overreact to a single, but a consistent, sustained inflammatory signal. Yeah, I mean, that's a problem for sure.
Yeah, so we do these we call them insights. So we have these basically based on your personalized data. So it's the blood data and your wearable data. We do some semi-automated, so they're generated automatically, and then we have an MD that actually checks them before they go out. But we have these insights at the bottom of your health report after every test. And if your CRP is high, we'll always say, look, you might have an infection. If you don't, then you really have to take a look at this. That's kind of how we always couch it that way. But if you're taking a test every month, I mean, it quickly, you get your baseline very quickly.
That's exactly it. It's I was only referring to one-off high CRPs because people have come to me occasionally who get tests every, say, 6 months in the doctor. In Ireland, you go and the doctor sends bloods away, but then they suddenly get a CRP and they go, oh my God, what did I do wrong? And I say, hey, chill. And invariably they get it a while later and it's just back where it always was. So sustained high is the problem. Excellent. Okie doke. Well, that's super. We'll just wrap it up before the Canon finishes its recording time limit. For tax reasons, they have a time limit on the Canons in Europe. But there you go. Any last thoughts, or I'll do an outro here with the links to the website and the offer we were talking about when I verify that and see can we get people a big discount to get involved with this and explore.
No, this was great. Very fun. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Great stuff. And our mutual friend Lee will be delighted because he's very excited about this too.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good luck. As always, hope you enjoyed that conversation. And the guys have given me a 50% discount to give out to followers or anyone who's interested in this technology. So it seems like a fantastic deal to me, to be quite honest. I'm going to be sent these test kits in any case, but half price. And that's half price for the one-off test of 17 diagnostics that we discussed, or half price off, even better, the monthly kind of arrangements. And there is a monthly there where each month you can get half price of what's shown on the initial screen, and then you can get quarterly, which is a lower cost, obviously, only doing the testing quarterly as you check your course, but it's half price off that as well. And the half price extends to 2 full months or 2 quarters, depending on the offer. So then it does revert back to the standard price. So you can do 1 month, you can do 2 months, you can cancel any time. It's very flexible, to be quite honest, but half price off the first 2 months or off the one-off offer. So there you go, guys. You can't say fairer than that, 50%. And only if you're interested, of course, have the means and are interested in charting your health progress. So there you go. Till next time, that'll do it.